This is the story of the fairy child. Let us be off. Away we go. There once lived a powerful king who had 3 daughters. One day the king overheard the princesses talking about marriage, about husbands and wives. He overheard the youngest of the 3 princesses say, "Without his wife, the man is nothing. It is the wife who is the true power in a marriage." The king was shocked and dismayed to hear these words come from his daughter's lips. His spirits darkened, and when the time came, in an effort to teach his youngest daughter a lesson, he married the oldest princess and the middle princess to 2 great boys. And the youngest princess, he married her to a lazy beggar. Well, the youngest princess and the lazy beggar lived together and enjoyed each other's company well enough. After a time, the youngest princess turned to her husband and said, "Go, bring me some kindling." When he had done that, she took a stick of wood and rapped him over the head. Well, this brought the beggar up short. Thereafter, he made sure to obey his wife in all her requests. One day the youngest princess said to her husband, "Go up to the mountain and bring back all the firewood you can find." The beggar did not want to do this, but he knew he had no choice. So up the mountain he went. He came to a clearing. There was a wide, rocky expanse. Not much wood did he see, but behind a large boulder, he found an enormous wooden chest full of shining gold coins. Well, he was delighted at his discovery, but the beggar really was quite lazy. So rather than lug the entire chest back down the mountain, he instead pocketed a few coins and returned home. He showed his wife what he had found. "Were there more coins like this up there?" asked the princess. The beggar nodded. "Come with me, husband," said the princess. The 2 of them walked back up the mountain to where the beggar had found the chest. Together, they lifted the heavy wooden chest and carried it back down the mountain. Now the princess and the beggar were rich. With the wealth from the chest of gold, the princess commanded a great palace to be built directly across from that of her father the king. The king, you may be sure, was astonished. How had his daughter afforded such a rich venture? He never was able to figure it out. A few years went by, and the youngest princess found herself with child. "Husband," she said, "please go out and find a suitable midwife." Yes, said her husband. But all that wealth and luxury and splendor had only made him lazier than ever. So he did not go and seek out a midwife. Truth be told, he did not care. So when the time came for the princess to give birth, she thought she would have to do so alone. She gritted her teeth and was about to give up hope of any help coming at all, when the door to their palace opened wide, and in walked 5 mysterious strangers. Now these were 5 angels, and they attended the princess in her birth. so that it was a rather comfortable affair, much more comfortable than it would have been otherwise. When the princess's daughter was born, the 5 angels gathered around the bedside and proclaimed that this daughter was a fairy child. The first angel said, "When she bathes herself, the water will turn golden." The second angel said, "When she weeps, her tears will turn to pearls." The third angel said, "When she smiles and laughs, roses will bloom in her cheeks." The fourth angel said, "When a suitor comes to ask for her hand in marriage, that will be her true love, and the one with whom she's destined to spend her life." And the fifth angel said, "I give the fairy child this locket." He fastened a locket around her neck. When the locket is removed, she will die. But when it is replaced, she will live again. Having given these marvelous gifts, the 5 angels left. The princess was delighted with her fairy child. The years went by, and the fairy child grew up into a young woman. Now, in a neighboring kingdom, a young prince had also been growing up, and he had frequently been visited with dreams of the fairy child. He did not know her name. He did not know where she lived. But as time went by, he fell in love with the girl from his dreams. He set out from his father's castle and walked this way and that about the land until, finally, after a long, long search, he discovered the home of the fairy child. He asked her mother, the princess, whether he might have her hand in marriage. The princess looked at her daughter. The young woman smiled, and her mother, the princess, gave her consent. Now the young prince ran at once back to his father's kingdom, for the wedding feast would be in 8 days, and he knew he must make preparations. The fairy child would visit him soon. She made ready to set out by carriage. Unbeknownst to the fairy child, and unbeknownst to her mother, the princess, her aunts, the 2 older princesses, had been filled with bitter envy for years to see how their youngest sister had fared, despite being wed to a lazy beggar. "What shall we do?" said the oldest princess and the middle princess. And they schemed away to foil the happiness of their younger sister and of their niece, the fairy child. They said, "Sister, you stay here. You rest in your palace, and we will take our niece to her wedding." Against her better judgment, the mother agreed, and the fairy child climbed into the carriage with her 2 aunts, the 2 older princesses. Her cousin, the oldest princess's daughter, came along for the ride as well. The carriage drove on for days and days. The fairy child's aunts had not brought any food. Indeed, they had not brought any water. The fairy child felt her lips grow dry and cracked. Her throat was parched. She knew she needed water. Her aunts took out a little skin of water, and they took turns sipping from it, and giving little sips to the cousin, but not a drop did they give to the fairy child. She began to beg and plead. "I am dying of thirst," she said. "If you want some of this water," said her aunts, "you'll have to trade us for it." "Yes, please, anything." "Very well, then. Give us your left eye." The fairy child was aghast to hear her aunt's request, but she knew that she would grow weaker and weaker and die of thirst. And so, finally, with trembling hand, she plucked out her left eye with a cry of pain and gave it to her aunts. Her aunts let her take a swig of water, and on they went. The days drew on. No more water did they give the fairy child, who now had only one eye. Her lips grew drier than ever. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and soon she began to beg for another drink. "If you want another drink," said her aunts, the two princesses, "give us your right eye." Well, the fairy child did not want to do this. She did not want to go blindly about the earth. But again she realized that she would die, and so she plucked out her right eye with a scream of pain and gave it to her aunts. Now, that was just what her aunts had been waiting for. They opened the carriage door and pushed her out and left her by the side of the road. What could the fairy child do? She sat there and wept and wept and wept, and the tears became pearls cascading down her face. Eventually, an old man came along. He put his hand kindly upon her shoulder and asked what had happened to her. She told him the whole story, and the old man gently led her back to his humble little hut. He and his old wife cared for the fairy child as if she were their own daughter. Well, when the carriage reached the castle of the king, the prince came out, expecting to see his beloved, the fairy child. But though they had made up the cousin to look quite beautiful indeed, the prince was not fooled for a second, and so he refused to marry her. Well, when word reached the little hut that the prince had refused to marry the woman that everyone around took to be his fiancée, the fairy child smiled, and she even gave a little laugh. It was the first sign of happiness she had shown since arriving in the hut. The flowers bloomed in her cheeks. She plucked them and gave them to the old man and the old woman. Go to the castle, she said. Show them these flowers, which are more beautiful and more fragrant than any they will ever have seen. They will ask to buy the flowers from you, but you must say that you want to trade the flowers, and you will only trade them for an eye. Do not tell them why you want the eye. Just do as I say. The old man and the old woman agreed. They went to the castle and said that they would only trade these heavenly blossoms for an eye. The two princesses, the aunts of the fairy child, wished to have these flowers for themselves, and so they traded away one of the eyes to the old man and the old woman in exchange for the flowers. The old man and woman went back to their hut, and they gave the eye to the fairy child. She put the eye into her socket, and she could see once more. A few days later, she smiled and laughed, and again the flowers bloomed in her cheeks, and she gave these flowers to the old man and woman as well. The old couple went to the castle and insisted that the only thing they would take in trade for these miraculous flowers would be another eye. The two princesses frowned, a bit suspicious, but said nothing. They gave the other eye to the old man and the old woman and took the flowers for themselves. The old couple went back and gave the other eye to the fairy child, and when she had put that one in her other socket, it was as if she had never been without either of her eyes. Suspicion gnawed away at the minds of her aunts. The two princesses thought and thought and thought. Why would those two old beggars want eyes? They must be in league with the fairy child, they said. The oldest princess told her daughter, her cousin, that she must feign illness and claim that the only thing that would make her well again would be the necklace of life. When the prince came in that evening, the cousin was lying on her bed, moaning and groaning. Even though he did not wish to marry her, the prince was filled with compassion for the young woman. "What troubles you?" he said. "Oh, I am deathly ill. I fear that I am not long for this world," said the cousin. "I think only one thing will make me well again." "What is it?" asked the prince. "The necklace of life," said the cousin. "Send your guards out to search all the houses nearby and see who has it. I know it must be near here somewhere." The prince had never heard of the necklace of life, but the young woman seemed so certain that he thought he might as well try. So he sent his guards out. "Go and find the necklace of life. No matter who has it, you must bring it back to the castle at once," he ordered. Word soon spread that the royal guards were going from house to house, demanding the necklace of life. Instantly, the fairy child knew that this was the work of her aunts. Before the guards had reached the little hut, the fairy child said, "Kind old mother, kind old father, know that when the guards come in, they will take this locket that I wear. When they take it off my body, I will fall down as if dead. But I will still be alive. Do not bury me in the earth. Instead, bring me up, high up into the mountains, where I can be near the flowers and all the birds of the air. Watch over me there until the locket can be returned and I can be woken once more." The old woman and man agreed to do everything she had requested, and not a moment too soon, for just then there was a pounding on the door. The guards burst in. "We are looking for the necklace of life," they said. When they spied the locket at the fairy child's breast, they did not even ask permission. They strode forward and ripped it from her and walked out the door of the hut without looking back. The fairy child sank to the floor, dead to the world, or so it appeared. The old couple did just as she had requested. They brought her up to the top of a nearby mountain and took it in turns, watching over her, one each day. When the guards brought the necklace of life to the prince, he showed it to the cousin. The cousin smiled when she saw the necklace, and she showed it to her mother and aunt, the two princesses. The princesses chuckled, for they knew that this must mean the fairy child was at last no more, for they knew quite well what would happen when it was removed from her body. Now, the prince was quite unhappy with his lot, for all his advisors and all the courtiers were strongly urging him to marry the cousin, whom he knew deep in his heart to be a false bride. He wandered this way and that about the countryside. His feet carried him up the mountain. When he came near the top, he saw in the distance the old woman sitting, and there, lying beside her, was, could it be? From far off it looked like the fairy child. There was a wide, rushing river in front of the prince, and he could not cross it. But oh, how he desperately wished to be on the other side, so that he might go over and see whether that was indeed his lost love, the fairy child. The old woman looked up and saw the prince. She smiled and walked forward. She took her hair in her hands and whipped it at the river. The water of the river instantly parted and allowed the prince to walk through. The prince was astonished to see this miracle performed by the old woman, but he said nothing. Instead, he rushed forward and saw that this was indeed the fairy child. How he wept to see her dead, or so he thought. "Your love is not dead," said the old woman. "All she needs is the necklace of life, and then she will be well again." The prince did, in truth, realize how strange it was that the cousin insisted the necklace was the only thing that could have made her well, and yet she did not even try it on. That night, the prince returned home and searched everywhere in the castle. He tiptoed into the room where the young cousin lay sleeping, and there, in a little box, in a little drawer, was the necklace of life.
The next day, he took the necklace of life back up the mountain. The old woman parted the waters and let him through. He fastened the locket about the neck of the fairy child. She opened her eyes and stood. Then, hand in hand, she and the prince and the old woman went back down the mountain. Before she left her foster parents, she hugged them and kissed them sweetly. "Dear old mother and father," she said,
"you cared for me as if I were your own daughter.
"I can never repay your kindness." And they hugged and kissed her too, and waved as they watched her go. Well, when they reached the castle, there was great rejoicing,
and everyone realized that the prince had been right all along,
and that this was his true bride. What should be done with traitors
who would treat a member of their own family so violently?
The prince asked. Well, the courtiers decided that the cousin and her mother and aunt, the two princesses,
would be tied to the tails
of wild donkeys, who would then gallop forth over the mountain roads until their bodies were broken and worn away to nothing at all. And so it was. The prince and his bride gave them no more thought. They were married, and there was a great wedding banquet. The young woman had all she could ever have wanted. When she looked out over the guests, she saw, to her surprise, the old man and the old woman. She went forward and embraced them. "How happy I am to see you here," she said. They smiled at her. "We are happy to see you, but know that this is the last time that we shall ever meet." "Why?" asked the young woman. "We are giants, and we must now go and rejoin our own kind. We were sent here to help you and protect you, but now our job is done." The old people left the castle. They strode off into the distance, growing larger and larger and larger until they took their true giant form. Away they went toward the horizon, and the only one who saw them go was the fairy child.